Hello again. I'm Philip Crum, co-founder of AMP, the Association for Mental Health Professionals. Kathleen Mills, my partner in crime here, is out for a week or two on some much-deserved rest in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan somewhere. Right now, she better be on a porch with a big old pot of coffee, looking out over a lake, one of her favorite places. So today we're going to talk to Arnold Cantu. Arnold is a social worker. We met Arnold pushing 2 years ago now. Don't even recall how he came to our attention, but glad he did. Arnold likes to write papers, and he's darn good at it. He's a social worker, and let me read you just a little bit about Arnold, and then we'll jump in. Arnold Cantu, LCSW, is a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist currently practicing in Fort Collins, Colorado, the northern part of the state. He was born in Mexico and raised in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. He brings a compassionate, culturally informed perspective to his work. Arnold has extensive clinical experience supporting children, adolescents, families, and adults across various settings, including social work, school social work, private practice, residential programs, outpatient clinics, and integrated primary care, behavioral health at UC Health. He's particularly known for his critical scholarship and advocacy regarding the limitations of the dominant biomedical psychiatric model of mental health. Arnold has served as lead editor for a series of volumes published by Ethics International Press on critical psychology and psychiatry, including theoretical alternatives to the psychiatric model of mental disorder labeling, practical alternatives to the psychiatric model of mental illness, and institutionalized madness. His writing and presentations often challenge pathologizing approaches and explore more empathetic, humanistic, and context-aware models of emotional and psychological distress. You know, the way we used to do things. Arnold previously pursued doctoral studies in social work at Colorado State University, where he focused on reforming mental health care to be more responsive to environmental, social, and circumstantial factors. He's a thoughtful voice in discussions around critical social work, academic freedom, and alternatives to mainstream mental health practices. Outside of work, he enjoys outdoor activities in Colorado, such as hiking, biking, jogging, as well as reading, writing, and fostering senior dogs. Anyway, Arnold has some new material out, and he contacted us a couple weeks ago and said, "You want to talk?" And I read the article and said, "Yes, I do." So this will be quite fascinating. He's a sharp cookie. So anyway, without further ado, if you'll give me just a few moments, I'm going to let Arnold in, and we'll just see what's on his mind this morning. Don't go away. All right. Well, I went out in the hallway and found Arnold Cantu, so we let him in, and here we are. We're back. Morning, Arnold.
Morning.
I forgot you're in another time zone, so you're up a little earlier than I am.
I'm an early bird anyway, though. I'm up about 4 or
Good.
5.
I almost called you this morning today. We can push this back, but I don't know. Let's don't do that.
That's all good.
You've penned an article, one of many, and it is called Critical Social Justice and Its Cognitive Distortions, Diagnosing the Liberals' Poor Mental Health. Now, is this a bash piece on the left and the liberals or not?
No, no, it's not. I shared this article. Actually, I shared the write-up by the College Fix on a couple of Facebook groups, and I mean, granted, they were pretty balanced Facebook groups, so they didn't attack me, but I could easily tell how some people got quite defensive about it pretty quickly. I mean, the title, honestly, with academic writing, most of it's dry and technical. We had to come up with some sort of title that was still fairly true, but also was an attention grabber. But no, it is not necessarily bashing a certain side. In fact, if people read it carefully, you don't even have to read it carefully to understand it. It's truly critiquing an ideology, a worldview, a belief system that's born out of the left side of the U.S. political system. So, you know, it's a critique of this idea that in the academic literature we call critical social justice. I mean, the common vernacular is woke ideology, whatever, things like that. But no, we're not necessarily bashing or critiquing people on the left. We are definitely challenging and critiquing a body of ideas born out of the left.
And in fact, in your article, there's a short paragraph that says, to be sure, the reader should not interpret this article as an attempt of generalizing one side of the American political system. Regardless, nevertheless, the subject of this critique, this article, does fall squarely within the left-wing side of political ideology in the United States. That's as close as I see you come in the article to simply stating what you just did, that No, this is not a hit piece. This is a discussion of something that's going on in a particular realm of the political sphere right now. My first question on my list is what's the purpose of the article? And I think it's in the very first sentence of the piece itself.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of kind of different strands of what influenced it. I came at it differently than my co-author Nathan. So I practice as a therapist. I've been in the profession for a little over a decade now, and I've also been kind of in the weeds about what is all of this that is described as critical social justice and whatnot. I mean, I had my experiences not too long ago in grad school when I attempted a doctoral program. I don't think I actually told you about this, Philip, but I tried a social work doctoral program here in Northern Colorado at Colorado State University. Finished all coursework, but, withdrew early because it was really bizarre, very, very cultish atmosphere
Mm.
of professors, questioning my beliefs and values and essentially, compelling me to think about things in a way that is all about critical social justice and its ideas and its tenets. And so, long story short, with me, I withdrew. Graduate school got involved, deans, etc. Was not very pretty, but I withdrew. But still, I've been pretty interested in this idea of critical social justice, especially because of how, I mean, I think my profession also plays a pretty big role in it of social work. It's the largest profession that makes up the mental health workforce in the
Hmm.
United States. Me and Nathan wrote separately a 5-piece series trying to uncover our sole accrediting body really kind of purposefully shifted things as far as accreditation standards and mandating social work programs across the country to adopt certain tenets of critical social justice.
Hmm.
Um, I think I'm getting a little off track. I guess the main
Fine.
point about this piece though was we've all heard headlines and rhetoric and discourse about, the snowflake liberal, which I also dislike these terms. I'm not endorsing them, or how, people on the left are just mentally ill. I take issue with that as well. The idea of someone being mentally ill is extremely controversial and contested. Something I reject. But I was still thinking of, okay, if people on the left and maybe even perhaps the younger generations in particular are struggling more emotionally and psychologically and behaviorally compared to the conservative counterparts, what else might be contributing to that? What is the missing piece? And this is something that's also influenced just by my work with clients and just hearing people's stories and how they're making sense of the world and what assumptions they have about themselves, what assumptions they have about other people, the world at large, etc. And so this is where me and my buddy got the idea of, I think truly one of the reasons that younger folks are struggling more with their mental health, and especially younger folks on the left side who identify as being from the left of the political aisle. I think the main reason, or one of the main reasons, is because when you kind of distill this entire body of ideas of critical social justice, when you distill it down and you try to draw a boundary around it and describe its main tenets, you realize it's highly distorted. It's not necessarily, in my view, based in observable, objective reality. There's a lot of, mental gymnastics being played, a lot of rationalization being played. And what me and my buddy learned is that I think it was actually fairly easy to apply, these identifiable cognitive distortions that exist in the field of psychotherapy for cognitive behavioral therapy. It was quite simple to apply some of those to some of the main tenets of critical social justice. I think that's been the missing piece. I read, we mentioned here, we're building off of some of the writings and ideas by Haidt and Lukianoff with The Coddling of the American Mind. And I read their book multiple times and I think I really, really like it. But I do think we're taking it a little step further because we are in a way trying to practically and pragmatically identify what is it about this worldview that is distorted and is likely leading to pretty crappy mental health on a certain
Hmm.
side of the aisle.
Now, you mentioned your co-author, Nathan. Is that him in your lap there?
No, no, this is my cat. I'm trying to keep her calm because she's gonna start raising hell asking for food. So I'm gonna try to keep her calm.
In your bio, I mentioned something about you like to foster senior dogs.
That's right. Hey, you remember that?
Is
Yeah,
that one on your couch?
that's what. Yep,
I
she's
didn't
gonna
even
be
notice him.
adopted.
Then something moved on the couch.
She'll be adopted later today. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's really good. That's good. All right, so let's dive into this whole your premise in the article is that CBT is about the removal, or one of the premises is about the removal of cognitive distortion from a person's thought processes. When I first met Kathleen, and she's on vacation, as I mentioned in the intro, she's in the Upper Peninsula right now, is why she's not here.
Okay.
But when I first met her, I asked her one day because I was trying to figure out the difference between a licensed professional counselor and a psychologist, And I said, "What is it you do in the little room?" And she said, "I help people think." That was it. And I thought of that again when I was reading the article because CBT is about the removal of cognitive distortions from a person's thought process. So define cognitive distortion for me, will you?
Sure. So even in I use the term cognitive distortion in the article itself. Me and my buddy were in agreement on that. But even then, when the way I practice, it's interesting. Maybe I'm a bit of a confusing person because I don't like the term cognitive distortion. You know what? And maybe I'll give a long-winded answer as to why. When I get to meet someone in the therapy room and I try to get a sense of their suffering and their struggles and difficulties and whatnot, I don't know, saying your thoughts and your views are distorted seems like it'd make them feel like crap. And this is, another conversation me and you had a couple years ago was this is my issue with diagnostic labeling and whatnot. It's very pathologizing. All that to be said, distortions is the term CBT developed to explain these thought processes. And I think that's all they really are. They are I call them patterns of thinking that are fairly twisted, not necessarily based in pretty solid reality or based on solid evidence of what the person's experiencing. And the key point being that it's these patterns of thinking that ultimately are causing the person some sort of emotional, psychological, or behavioral distress. Now, if there's no distress associated with it, then I don't think it would be a distortion at all. Well, that's how I frame it. All it is, really patterned ways of thinking, of making sense of the world that are not necessarily based in reality and or supported by solid evidence and that cause distress.
Couldn't you make a case that that's a good definition of distorted thinking?
It is. I mean, it could be. But I don't know, man. Like, I think the reason okay. So this is the other part I was going to mention. The reason I don't like distorted thinking is because if you follow someone's story carefully, you can see where it does make sense for them in some ways. They've learned this belief system along the ways, whether it's critical social justice, whether it's someone who's experienced some sort of trauma, etc. They've adopted a belief system that when you follow it, it makes sense in some ways. There is some logic to it. And I think the reason I don't like distorted thinking is because I don't know, it kind of implies that you're
Yeah.
you're
That's what I was
wrong.
gonna Right, right, right. It's tomato or tomato.
Yeah.
They're both round and red, but one of them carries a connotation. Tomato, you must be from England, or you must be a highbrow or blue blood or whatnot.
Right.
All
Yeah,
right,
the
interesting.
connotation piece. That's precisely it. Yeah.
As you mentioned just a moment ago, it's not distorted thinking within their worldview.
Right. Yeah. And it's quite logical thinking within their worldview.
It is
If I see someone who's experienced some sort of pretty severe trauma and they think people are a threat, who am I to say that's distorted thinking? It makes sense given their history and their experience in the worldview.
Yeah, you even mentioned in the article truth with a capital T, which plays into thoughts I've had before about, people say my truth, your truth, it's my truth. That's just another phrase in my mind for my opinion, my experience. It doesn't mean it's the truth, capital T. There's only one truth with a capital T. And in order to have individual truths, you've got to get rid of the truth with a capital T. And I'm not looking to get into a religious discussion, but it's real. I really think the entire subject matter of what we're talking about is a spiritual battle that has spilled over into the physical.
Hmm.
But that's a whole nother discussion, I suppose. No, that's as far as I'm going to elaborate. So back to the CBT and the cognitive distortion. If CBT is about the removal of erroneous thinking, if we want to call it that,
Sure.
from a person's thought processes, we did a podcast 3 weeks ago, in which I was talking about, it was the Childs versus Salazar issues, but how the entire academic system has been hijacked and turned into a Trojan horse. The state of Texas, or any state, has a list of things that you must check off in order to get a license from the state. And if academia can take that list of courses that are required, subject matter courses, and I'm going to oversimplify this, but it's not far off, and the titles of the courses don't change, but the subject matter does, then that student, that graduate, can go to the state and say, hey, I've checked all the required boxes. And now what you have is a socially brainwashed applicant who with a license. Anyway, so the weapon of choice for the CSG warrior is the injection
CSJ
of,
warrior.
huh?
The CSJ warrior.
That's right. The weapon of choice is the injection of cognitive distortion into a person's thought processes, as you referred to in the article as reverse CBT, or the Trojan horse effect, I'm adding.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, I'm following.
I like the way in the article, I'm going to go there. I like the way that because I've been thinking for quite a while that, how do you fight this? How do you, or counter it? How do you counter an ideology where the adherent is so thoroughly indoctrinated? You used the word cult a little while ago, cultish. How do you reach them? He said rhetorically, because back to my point, this is not a fair debate. They're on one playing field, we're on another, and a discussion between the two isn't on the same playing field, is
That's a
it?
different worldview. Yeah.
Yeah. And how do you convince somebody that doesn't want to be convinced and is convinced that you're wrong because that was part of the indoctrination? How do you convince them to have a intellectually honest debate about this stuff when they've been trained not to?
I mean, so if the person does not want to have the debate or does not want to, let go or loosen the grip on some of these beliefs and ideas, I don't. The answer to that is it's not going to happen. I think some
Mm-hmm.
people are quite on either side of the aisle. Some people are just quite committed to some beliefs they have, and that's in some ways that's okay. But I think, I mean, my experience. This is something I don't think I actually mentioned in this article. Maybe I mentioned it in the College Fix coverage of it, but I'll give examples of how I am able to do that in the therapy room. And fundamentally, I think what has to be in place first in order to have these kinds of conversations with people is there needs to be actually a solid relationship in place. It's been pretty interesting, working with clients. And I'll show my cards here and say, like, I don't identify with any side. I'm apolitical or politically homeless since especially 2020. And so I don't have a dog in the fight of making therapy political. I think the people who do that should not be practicing as therapists. I think that's highly inappropriate. And so I'm already coming at it in this sort of chameleon-like way where I'll adapt my approach and my thoughts and conversations with clients in a way that is kind of aligned with them, mostly to build a relationship. I don't want to in any way be guns blazing saying you're wrong when I'm just meeting them
Mm-hmm.
for an intake assessment. And so I have that relationship with them, and that has to be in place. If there's trust, if we're getting along, if they feel safe and secure to really let their guard down, it is quite, I think, simple to help them not necessarily let go of their beliefs entirely, but to start to revise their beliefs a little bit or begin to revise their beliefs a little bit. And the idea I throw out, there's a term for it. We just call it Socratic questioning, based on Socrates, which is just
Mm-hmm.
asking questions, poking holes in people's thinking, the belief system, some exceptions, etc. And you'll see, and I think there's two pieces to it. You'll see that they're also more willing to let go or revise these particular beliefs with the help of a relationship and Socratic questioning. But especially so if they're also able to see for themselves that these particular beliefs are causing them distress. And I think once you have that in place, maybe I need to do a formal write-up on what I'm trying to say here because now I'm kind of fleshing this out. But if you're able to have some buy-in and help them see that, the way you think about I don't know, I'm just gonna throw something out. The way you think
Mm-hmm.
about man and you're surrounded by them and you can't get away from them is causing you distress. Is there any, I like to say, is there any wiggle room in revising this particular belief you have about man to something that's maybe a bit more accurate and helpful for you? And people typically are in therapy to lessen their distress. And I'm not there to endorse their distress or reinforce it. And so I think once you get those conditions in place, it's actually not too difficult to help people, you know, loosen look, my motto with clients is a lot of folks enter my office thinking in a fairly black and white term, in dichotomous ways, etc. And a lot of my work with folks is to help them feel more comfortable living in the gray, in the messy middle. I usually get pushback because it's scary and we like to simplify things, which is, what are the arguments we're making in this article? But then people see that it's not so bad to be making it through the world with this
Hmm.
sense of ambiguity and uncertainty. And
What if
that's,
there's no gray area?
well, I
It's
mean,
black
go
and
ahead.
white thinking.
Say again?
Black and white thinking.
What if
There's
there's no gray area?
Yeah, right.
I mean, that depends on the idea that we're talking about in therapy. If someone's describing the harm that a significant other is causing them, I mean that's objectively pretty black and white if that's what's happening and there's evidence and all that stuff. But if someone is making a claim that, all men are out to get me, or, the world is gonna end in the hellfire because of the administration, that seems a lot easier to challenge and to try to peel back some layers and add some nuance to what they're really thinking about it. So no, I think some things can be black and white. I would imagine more often than not in the therapy room, a lot of it is quite in the messy middle gray area and trying to help
Mhm.
clients feel more comfortable there.
But there has to be a gray area in the first place before somebody's willing to change their mind or consider changing their mind.
Yeah, there has to be a gray area, and I think there also just has to be a willingness on the person to want to entertain that. 'Cause I think
Yeah,
it can be scary to be in this place of uncertainty and ambiguity and the complexity of life. And if someone is terrified of that, you're going to get a lot more pushback to your
yeah.
ideas.
I've been wanting for some time for somebody smarter than I am to put together a list of tactics that are used by the liberals that believe this ideology. And you've gone a long way towards doing that in this article. As I mentioned before we got started, I like the way that you tried to develop and did a good job of developing the larger framework, the worldview, and then moved into from the macro into the micro. You've got 5 bullet points in this article: critical social justice, CAG, the postmodern critical theory movement. It says the framing of the world as a struggle between oppressor and oppressed groups. And that's it in a nutshell right there. That's straight out of 1930s Frankfurt School stuff. As you well know, the first 2 iterations, I call it cultural Marxism 3.0 because the first 2 versions didn't work. Bottom up revolution, top down revolution, none of those worked. Killed few 100 million people. And so the Frankfurt School developed the whole cultural thing. Well, if we can't foment a revolution from external sources, we'll do it from internal. And that's been going on since the 30s, as you know. And we're fighting it right now. I think this is the inevitable outcome of all of that we're dealing with. So the framing of the world as a struggle between oppressor and oppressed groups, and then you dive into the obsession with bullet point number 2, the power language, with the obsession with power, language, knowledge, and the relationship between them, which is a further refining of the oppressor versus oppressed groups. Isn't it ironic that their problem with power is exactly the thing that they use to foment their revolution here? They're using a power structure to get what they want because power is bad.
Good point. Yeah, I can attest to that given my experience in grad school recently.
Uh-huh. You naughty boy. And the third bullet point is the identity synthesis, which is a framework that prioritizes group identities, race, gender, sexual orientation as the preferred lens for understanding social dynamics and structuring political action. Again, that's just more tactical stuff that fits within the framing things as a struggle between oppressor and oppressed groups.
That's the big emphasis. That's what identity markers do you hold? And one of them being, I think that I started off in the article saying, one of them lately being psychiatric diagnoses. That's one
Right.
that is a big one.
Yeah, we're going to get to this in a minute. How do you fix this? And I have my battle strategy that I'm going to throw out and let you comment on, but I think they're utilizing it. There is no one tactic that they use. They use a multi-front approach. We're going to hit them on the wings. We're going to hit them straight up the middle. We're going to fly over and drop bombs. We're going to circle around and hit them from the back. And if we can dig tunnels and come up from below, we'll do it. That's what they're doing. And I think we'll have to get to that same point. The radical social justice theory, the belief that society is divided into social identity groups defined by categories. Talk to me about that. Where does that fit in?
Well, I mean, so these bullet points, when I first wrote my piece about my experience in graduate school at CSU, that was When did that piece come out? Last year, I think, and I wrote it the year before. It's really interesting because it's what I learned is that, I knew what I was going through. Talk about lived experience and using that term now.
Mhm.
I knew what I was going through in grad school and how it felt pretty disgusting. And I knew kind of the phrasing and terms that my classmates and professors and faculty were using. But, at that point in time, everything seemed kind of hazy to me. It's like there's all these bits and pieces here that, you start to pick up, talk about patterns. You start to pick up on patterns on how people think about things and how what assumptions they're making and what solutions they're proposing, etc. And so when I wrote that other piece about 2 years ago, I wasn't, I hadn't come across, and some of these are newer publications, I hadn't come across, okay, what is this that they are promoting? How do I define and what is the term to explain what these people are promoting in academia? And so it took me at least a couple years too to really go back into the literature, read other writers on the topic, different authors, researchers, etc. And so my bullet points there, to me, I think are I'm borrowing definitions of what a lot of people are using to define this idea that I think could just be the umbrella of critical social justice. And so I'm kind of compiling them together. But
Mhm.
to your question there, I think that which one did you ask about? Categories?
Well,
I
I guess it's not almost not a fair question, actually. I'm picking on one of the 5 bullet points because I think I see what you were doing here is exactly as you outlined. It's a list of
different
labels.
iterations.
Yeah. Exactly. Different iterations of things which all boil down to oppressor, oppressed, and
The use of
class.
community markers, power, etc. Yeah.
Right, right. So I like the way you did that. I liken it to, in my 8th grade mind, all right, this entire ideological thing on the left that we're dealing with now is like a tornado of
Hmm.
thoughts and ideas. And I've got my arm around this tornado. Okay.
Hmm.
I know where the fight is. I'm now trying to make sense of what's going on inside this tornado. And that's the difficult part. I also think that, to continue the weather analogy, that the people that are living inside that analogy are also having trouble making sense of it and life. And the proof of that manifests itself in this higher levels of
Distress.
distress, mental illness that you're seeing, that you quote in these various surveys that you reference. Am I close?
That's a pretty good analogy. Yeah. No, no, no. I like that. Yeah. And maybe if I could nitpick it a little bit, I
Sure,
would
just as
say
long as
that,
you stay in the weather theme here.
well, I would say, like, I guess what I was struggling with just now is that I don't think the people inside the tornado are struggling with it. I think they're kind of using this tornado to really power through and disrupt. When we talk about another word they use, disrupt things and change things forcefully. I think the people outside the tornado who are looking in which is where I am and where I was in grad school, we're trying to make sense of what's going on inside there. And what's going on inside there, I think we can just point to the table that me and my co-author created, because I think what's going on inside there are these various tenets that are just very commonly regurgitated within the critical social justice ethos or zeitgeist. And then me and my co-author decided, well, then we need to slap some cognitive distortion labels on them, because it's truly not necessarily, in my view, really solidly based in evidence and reality. It's riddled with distorted ways of thinking, with unhelpful ways of thinking. And so, let me just kind of be more precise here. So, to go back to your analogy, I think the ones inside it do know really what's going on. They know what kind of beliefs likely they're espousing and regurgitating. At the same time, because of those beliefs, they're also hurting themselves because they're likely to cause a lot of their own sort of emotional and psychological distress. And us on the outside, we're just, let's get away from this tornado because it's caught wreaking havoc. Which actually, now we extend this analogy, it's your other question you have, what do we do about it? But no, I think the ones inside it know exactly, or know pretty decently, what those beliefs are that are from critical social justice, at the same time are more likely to cause themselves unnecessary suffering.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting take. They may or may not, percentage of them aren't trying to question their beliefs. They're running with their beliefs. And then the mental outcomes of that. All you have to do is watch the YouTube videos of these people, some of them coming unhinged. There is a percentage of them that are experiencing distress from their
Yeah,
beliefs. We can divide the group up into subgroups. Some of these people are questioning what they believe. Most of them are probably not. They're just running with it. And some of them don't know what they believe beyond the 3 or 4 bullet points that they keep
yeah,
repeating.
yeah. I mean, they
You
maybe
know?
just want to belong too. And
Yeah.
as humans, we like to have things simple. And so, why don't I belong on this side that, to one of the points we try to make, this side that by outward appearances sounds like they have noble intentions and good intentions, but it's truly, I think, I call critical social justice like a cancer to society. But these people, yeah, they just want to belong. And what's easier than
Right.
belonging than just picking a side?
Goes to motivation, Your Honor. The thing that made me sit up straight in my chair when I was reading your article was when you got to the part about you've got a chart in your article here about the top 5 or 6 cognitive distortions that are manifesting themselves in the critical social justice warriors' beliefs and applications of those beliefs. And I'm really glad you did that. I'm really
This is
glad you did that.
this is what I think, in my opinion, unless someone's written about it and I want to read their article or their ideas about it. But I think that table is, in my opinion, what has been missing in this discussion. When people dogpile the left, which I think is unfair also, when people just reduce people from the left to just, delicate snowflakes, which I think is also very unfair. I'm not going to jump on that bandwagon. When people have these top kinds of conversations and debates, it's, that's one tactic to take. But I think this table in particular, just to give myself a pat on the back and my co-author, I think that's what's been missing because this is what I see, or I can, no, it has been what I see in the therapy room when I see clients who make these assumptions about themselves as a quote unquote person of color and a coworker who is lighter skin color, and they're making these unfair assumptions, and those assumptions are causing that client distress. Okay, that is a tenet of critical social justice where you have permission to easily slap people into that really annoying acronym I don't like, BIPOC and white. That's one distortion right there, one patterned way of thinking, which is dichotomous thinking. And then you're making these assumptions about that person based on skin color and other people based on skin color. You are generalizing. That's another
Hmm.
cognitive distortion. And that is something you're given permission to do within the critical social justice ideology. And so, this, I think, long story short, I think what's been missing from a practical standpoint of why might people on the left be struggling a bit more if they're more likely to endorse critical social justice ideology? And also, why do people really recoil at these ideas? There's a lot of pushback across the country of these critical social justice ideas, DEI, etc. And I think this is hopefully another way to make sense of like, well, no, this is why people don't like it. Not because people are bigots. Sure, some are, there's always exceptions, but this is why people don't like it because this is what that kind of worldview is doing at a pretty large scale.
Back up to 30,000 feet. Does the traditional academic preparation for CBT prepare a counselor to have these discussions in the session room with somebody with a social justice adherent? Does traditional training prepare you to do that? Or do we need a course, Arnold, you and me? Do we need a course here?
I mean, a course would be pretty fun. That's a good question, man. I don't know because I'm going to be inclined to say no and make a generalization, which is also unfair. But I'm going to be inclined to say no because I don't think we cited this. Actually, we maybe did cite some of this research a little bit, but there's also the I think a sort of trap in some ways that the mental health profession as a whole leans a certain way too. And if you have a profession that leans left, I think that's been what's been consistently shown about the mental health profession. If you have a profession that leans predominantly to the left, and you have an academic industry that leans predominantly to the left, and they're good, and academia is where they're teaching you about CBT as one modality. I mean, I'll point the question back at you. What is the likelihood that people leaning to the left are going to critique ideas that are from the left as they teach the future generation that leans left? I,
Exactly.
I'm sure some programs will do a good job of it. I hope so. But I can already imagine, like, what if a student raises their hand in a therapy course in grad school and points out one of these ideas, like, Professor, isn't that, dichotomous thinking to slot people into BIPOC and white? and white people, I'm sure that professor would probably report that kid to their
Hmm.
biased reporting line or to the dean or something. So I don't know. I'd hope so, but I'm not optimistic about that.
Yeah. Which is a nice little segue into something you brought up, Trump's Executive Order 14279, which we've done several in-depth pieces on, links in the show note. And you referred to it, I think, as the stick or the carrot model, that an external locus involving, let's say, legislative action, whether it's through an executive order or the state legislature or the federal Congress passing things that say, no, no, you can't do this and so forth. You see that as a stick, an external force acting upon this ideology that doesn't permit other ways of thinking, versus, I assume, the carrot. What's the carrot to you? Is that an internal dialogue?
No, well, I mean, carrot is being able to persuade people to revise their positions and how they're approaching things through, like, just not through compelling, through softer means, through convincing, through dialogue, through being nicer about it, things like that. To me, that's the carrot. I'm
How's
assuming
that
you're
work?
gonna ask. I'm assuming
How's
you're
that
gonna ask.
working out for it?
So
Well,
it's interesting when me and Nathan wrote this piece and submitted it. This is this is another part of just the academic industry and publishing and whatnot. We submitted this piece back in October of last year. Back in October of last year, 2025, we did think the carrot might be the way to go about it. October, and this is how long, manuscripts can be taken to review. 6 months is probably pretty common, I imagine. Since then, a lot of things happened. Since then, me and Nathan wrote together this particular 5-part series about trying to explain the behind the scenes machinations of the Council of Social Work, CSWE, the accrediting body, and really looking at some of their own documents and the processes they likely use to force the accrediting standards to be neutral not too long ago to very heavily DEI focus in the most recent standards, which all social work programs are contingent on if they want to keep their accreditation. We did that 5-part series. Other things happened, and then me and him realized, I think he's still on this end of the spectrum. We're thinking there's no way in hell the carrot is going to work when it comes to this kind of reform.
I
I
think you
think,
just mentioned what you just mentioned a minute ago is the exact point. What's the likelihood of an entire group of people that believe one ideology and have been taught that everybody else is wrong? And if they say this, that's proof that they're
yeah,
out to get you. It's not going to happen. The
it,
carrot by itself can't happen.
yeah, I think at a large scale, if it's about reforming institutions or professional organizations that have a big influence, unfortunately, yeah, I don't think the carrot's going to work anymore at all. I don't think it ever did work. I don't think it's going to work. I've let go of that as the hope. I do think, unfortunately, it is going to take the stick. I don't know what that can look like. I mean, I think so. Yeah, there was that executive order that came out early last year, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't think I've seen much of a change with my profession and the accrediting body. So
Well, yeah, it was back in February or April of 2025. I forget
that's
which
right.
month it was, but yeah, it's about a year and a half process. And this is all in material we've done elsewhere. And I'll put a link in the show notes for that. But things are happening. It's just behind the scenes right now. And they had 2 1-week sessions where things were decided. And that just finished up in the month of May. It was the second week. And so now they're going through everything that was decided in that 2-week period. Come November of this year, they'll have the Department of Education will put out its final, here's what we're going to do manual and
Okay.
begin implementation. So without going too far off into the rabbit trail, which we do in that other podcast, it's going to change things. I think, in the bigger picture here, where I'm going with all this is back to my battle analogy. It's going to take a little bit of everything. It's going to take a stick approach. There have to be laws into place that we can look at and say, look, this is constitutional, it's moral, and it's a law that's in place.
Hmm.
It's going to take the carrot approach, the people at the grassroots level, students in their classes that are willing to speak up. It's
Yep.
going to take a number of things all at the same time. So I don't think you're wrong. I don't think it's one tactic that's going to win the war, so to speak, because it is an ideological war. It's a spiritual war, as I said earlier, spilling over into a physical realm, which could get to be, ask the 130 million people who died in versions 1 and 2 of Marxism whether
Right.
it's an existential issue or not, because it is. And I think that's where we are. You mentioned in your article that there are approximately 10, somewhere between 10 and 15 recognized cognitive distortions. And then in your table, you used 5 or 6 of them that are the most commonly
Employed. What
employed
kind
or
of
represented. Yeah.
mhm.
And I really like that chart. I'm going to sleep with that chart, Arnold. I like that chart because it provides the answer to the "what the hell just happened" question.
Yeah.
When one of these people says something or does something, what the hell's going on here? And I love that. So keep that up and explore that even further if you think it's valid. You mentioned towards the tail end of the article something called the certainty trap. And
Mhm.
I gather that's one of the 10 to 15 cognitive distortions.
That's actually one that was coined not by the CBT folks. That's one I added to this piece. That was coined by a sociologist. I think Alana Redstone is her name. She wrote a book on it. Really fascinating book. But that's just one we tacked on as like this is its own kind of cognitive distortion or thinking pattern that is very much well aligned with our other criticisms in the table.
Yeah. Wow. Where do you see all this going?
Depends when you ask me, man. What morning I wake up and you ask me this.
Well,
I don't
to
know.
your credit, you're willing to say, I've changed my mind on something. That is so refreshing these days because it doesn't happen very often. That's academically honest, and we appreciate that. So, where do you see all this going?
I don't know. I mean, a lot of this, I mean, a lot of the big movements and I guess, this is another article me and Nathan wrote about in the Academic Questions Journal by the National Association of Scholars, where it was mostly my idea because he gets annoyed by it. I like to use the term permission structure quite a bit. And, it's like this kind of, for lack of better words, this vertical permission structure that we talk about with social work, where it's, this accrediting body and its ideas give these programs down here permission to really shove these ideas down students' throats in some ways. I'm sure a lot of programs do that. Not all of them. And a lot of where I think I see this going and a lot of what's happened so far, truthfully, I think it's because we're in this different permission structure because of the current administration. And so what I'm a little worried about is, how much more change can be made within the current administration, which I'm very cautiously optimistic about, if at most. But then I also worry, if then it's a different party that takes over the next administration, all this is just going to be,
Hmm.
what will it be for nothing kind of thing. And so I don't know where it's going. I'm not super optimistic. I think I'll do a little bit I can here and there to kind of just put these ideas out there and see if they gain traction. And maybe in this way, maybe this is more of the carrot approach, this article where it's, I'm just trying to, give people permission to reconsider how they with their worldviews and, arguing that it's possible their worldview is their own cause of distress based on critical social justice ideology. Um, all in all, I'm just bouncing around your question too. I think all in
That's all
all,
right.
too, one thing that with this whole carrot and stick approach, talk about another kind of dichotomy. I think in my ideal outcome of all this though would still be that I would hope there's this universal openness to talk about these ideas and tenets, but also be willing to critique them in all university programs that discuss them. Because I think the unfortunate part, at least based on my experience, if I had written this piece while I was in grad school at CSU, I probably would have been asked to leave, most likely, because that's not to be questioned. And so I'm not saying I don't like that route some states have taken where they say you cannot discuss these ideas. I think that's going to recoil back at some point. What I would like is for people to just be able to discuss these ideas and ideologies, their pros and cons. What do you like? What are its merits? What are its weaknesses? Is this the solution to enacting social change, or do we need or reconsider? What I think would be, I think in some ways that's kind of therapy too. Now that I think about it, I mean,
Hmm.
we're that whole Socratic dialogue. Is this belief of yours benefiting you, or is it causing you more harm? And it's we can discuss it, we can debate it. I like to get philosophical with my clients, but there is that openness, those kind of fundamental conditions in place of
Right.
we can debate this. There's no sacred cow in here.
I think I just heard you say we need to get back to an academic environment where all ideas are on the table and openly debated without fear of it being shown the door
Yeah.
during your doctoral program.
What an original idea, man.
What a
Yeah.
thought. What a thought. In fact, those societies, those worlds that forget the ideas that cause them pain are going to repeat them.
Yeah.
We have to keep them on the table so we can point at it and go, all right, I
Yeah.
hear you, but here's what happened last time we did this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you mentioned something. I don't want to let this one go before we're done. At the top of the hour, you said mentally ill is not the same thing necessarily as a cognitive distortion, to continue to use that phrase.
Yeah.
You want to make a differentiation. Why is a cognitive distortion not necessarily considered a mental illness?
Well, I mean, that oh god, that's a whole other conversation, man. That it's I would say it's not because the very and this is where I'll probably get crapped on because it's such a radical idea, but I mean, the very idea of someone being quote unquote mentally ill is very, very contested. Maybe not in the public arena or in public discourse. We tend to think that idea is undisputable, it's a medical condition, etc. It never has been. It really is not. The very concept of someone being mentally ill or the very concept of mental illness is still hotly debated. I can point people to some of the philosophical literature on it, the philosophy of psychiatry, philosophy of mental disorder. It's not something that is necessarily fundamentally agreed upon whatsoever. And I don't like that it's also used as this cudgel to hurt people to shut them down either. It's like the whole I'll throw one of my hat in the ring here. And I write a little bit about this in a couple of philosophical articles coming out in another journal where this is why I also dislike certain people who, with the whole transgender movement, the transgender debate, I also really dislike when people just say they're just mentally ill. Again, that you do that, you're doing the same tactic of just shutting people down, reducing them to a label, like you're just a liberal, you're just a MAGA or whatever, and to just label someone as you're just mentally ill when the idea of mental illness is still debated to this day, I'm not going to endorse that either. I think to me, that's a pretty weak approach to take. And
You think
so
it's a rush to labeling?
it's a rush to label with a label that's still really controversial. And so, yeah, why is cognitive distortion not a mental illness? Well, because we don't even know. Well, some of us will reject the idea of mental illness even being a thing, such as people like me and others in my camp. And so I'm not going to equate mental illness to something when mental illness itself is still pretty hotly debated.
Okay. You've penned a new article, which I have not had time to read yet. So if you'd like to tell me what that one's about, and I have the link, so I'll include that in the show notes as well. So tell me what your newest article is about. Then I'm going to land this plane.
The one that I just sent you recently?
Yes, sir.
That wasn't mine. That's so the College Fix, that news organization, covered this article. And so it's a write-up they did, and we had additional thoughts in there, me and my co-author, because we were able to send additional thoughts through email. So that one, yeah, people should read it themselves. We try to contextualize the article a bit more because I think, when I posted some of these ideas on this article, granted on Facebook groups, people thought I was critiquing CBT or politicizing CBT. And I was saying, no, it's not it. Read the actual article. I'm using the model of CBT to critique critical social justice. It's a very different thing.
What's the kryptonite for this whole battle, discussion, whatever word you want to give it, this frictional, fractional thing that's happening in our world today? What's the kryptonite for the liberal Venn diagram you've outlined? Do we fight it internally? Do we fight it externally? Or do we just back off and let it collapse under the weight of its own illogical gravity? What's your best approach today?
Damn, I mean, that last thing you just said, I think it's an idea. And people do argue of just, let people of this ideology talk and kind of make a fool of themselves. That could very well be a tactic. I don't know, man. This is gonna sound really cheesy and corny, I think, but especially because one of the tenets of critical social justice is this emphasis on identity and identity markers of all kinds. I honestly think the kryptonite, again, you're gonna roll your eyes thinking it's cheesy, but I think a kryptonite of it is to really be willing to see others as just part of the human race, man. Like, we're all human and it's irrespective of identity markers. We don't have to reduce others. We also probably don't want to be reduced ourselves. So why do we do that to other people? But I think that's what therapy is kind of a microcosm about, pretty good work can be done, pretty good healing can be done because it's two humans treating each other as two humans. And when you have that in place as this fundamental condition, it's really hard, I think, to espouse some of these tenets of critical social justice when you realize that the person in front of you is just another deeply flawed human being as you are.
Okay. And on that point, I'm going to make 2 points and then we'll land this plane and let you go adopt that puppy dog back there. Did you know, Arnold, that Kathleen and I travel to Austin, Texas about 3 or 4 or 5 times a year to speak in front of the licensing boards and tell them what we think? And if you're listening to this and you happen to be in the state of Texas, you can come with us. You can meet us there. You can Zoom it in. You don't have to say anything. Just show up and let the board know you're paying attention and you're listening and help us keep them honest. The link for that is in the show notes. Again, it's the Austin BBQ Club. And the other point I'd have you know, Arnold Cantu, is that once a year, typically in the month of October, we have a conference. Our 4th annual conference is coming up. It's always in October, and you can find that link in the show notes. We've got 3 days of marvelous lined up this time around. And it's not your traditional, typical conference. We take our material very, very seriously, but we like to have fun when we do it. And yeah, that's me, Mr. Fun.
I
So
believe it.
anyway, links in the show notes on that. We'd love to have anybody listening join us. You don't have to be a counselor to show up. You can be an MD. You can be a Joe citizen like me. If you have an interest in this topic, Arnold Cantu, you too can show up. Just point yourself east and get on I-20 and you'll be here before you know it. All right.
Good.
I appreciate you doing this, Arnold. Let's do it again. I'm going to go back and read that other article that I mentioned that I haven't seen. And any last thoughts?
No, I appreciate it, Philip. Thank you.
It's been a blast. Appreciate it. I love this kind of discussion. And I thank everybody out there for carving out yet another hour of your day, of your week to be with us. And I need you to be good.